Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for National NSSLHA's Office Hours Resume Workshop. National NSSLHA Office Hours is a live event series that's designed to bring students and professionals together to talk about topics that are both relevant and important to current students. My name is Kennedy Wilkins, and I serve as National NSSLHA's Vice President for Programming, and I'm a current second-year SLP grad student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I would like to introduce you to my partner on the National NSSLHA Executive Council, Katie.
Kennedy. My name is Katie Kingsbury, and I serve as National NSSLHA's Vice President for Audiology Programming. I'm a second-year audiology student at the University of Iowa. So for tonight, Kennedy and I will monitor any questions you ask throughout the night. We'll kind of have a portion set a little bit later specifically for Q&A, but do that for the Q&A box. So rather than the chat, make sure to be using that Q&A feature.
Thanks, Katie. So here at National NSSLHA, we understand that resumes can feel a little bit overwhelming, whether you're applying for grad school, applying for clinical fellowships, externships, all the things. So because of that, National NSSLHA wanted to offer a way for students to seek advice from professionals that have firsthand experience with resumes in different types of settings. So tonight, we're going to hear from 4 CSD-related professionals with experience in reviewing resumes, as well as coaching students on how to write or tailor the resumes for specific situations. Although we have developed questions for the panelists based off of your registration submissions, this event is meant to be an open discussion. Please, like Katie was saying, ask any questions through that Q&A box feature that can be found on your Zoom bar. We're going to try our best to get through as many of them as we can, but if we're unable to get to your question, feel free to contact us at the end of it using the last slide that will have our information. We're fortunate to have a panel of professionals who took time out of their busy schedules to help us. So with that being said, I would like to introduce our panelists for the evening. Can you please briefly introduce yourself, including your discipline, SLP or audiology, and or your role or your past and current work settings?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Belinda Doherty. I am a national advisor for NSSLHA, and I am also an associate professor at California State University, Long Beach, where I also serve as our interim graduate advisor. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jamila Harley. I am the Director of Career Management Services at ASHA. I'm also a speech language pathologist. And previously, I worked in healthcare roles. I worked in inpatient rehab, as well as serving as a Director of Rehab and Skilled Nursing Facilities for several years before coming to ASHA.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Lena Joseph. I am an audiologist. I am also the founder and CEO of High Level Speech and Hearing Center, which is a speech and hearing center that provides services to schools and daycare centers across the state of Louisiana. We currently service over 250 schools and daycare centers, so we're very busy. I am also the founder of Drums Headphone Company, which I'm wearing right now. A pair. And our headphone company just launched as a startup in 2022 as just a kind of a spinoff of my current company, High Level Speech and Hearing Center. And to date, we have successfully been able to sell our product all across the United States, including an official partnership with the New Orleans Pelicans NBA team. So I am happy to tell you more about it, and thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Louise Nichols. I'm a medical speech and language pathologist. I have worked primarily in the hospitals in acute care, as well as inpatient rehab and long-term acute care. Most recently, for the last 2 years, I've been working as the clinical director at North Carolina Central University for their graduate program, but I'm actually getting ready to transition back into the hospitals, which I really, really love, as the rehab director at Duke Health. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited to be here talking with you all tonight.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing and for being here tonight. I know that we're all going to gain so much insight from y'all's perspective and time. So before we begin, let's do a quick poll to see where all of you are in your CSD journeys. This is going to help out our panelists focus on what type of students we have here tonight. Awesome. It looks like we've gotten a majority of responses in. So thank you guys. We are very grateful to have you here with us tonight, no matter what stage of education in your professional journey you are currently in. So with that being said, we are going to begin with our resume presentation from Dr. Doherty, and then we will move into contributed questions from the panel as well as the Q&A from the audience. Dr. Doherty, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Kennedy. I appreciate you. So I'm going to go into an activity that will be a little interactive, calling on you all to kind of think through these resumes that I'll present to you. I have been a reviewer for our Department for Graduate Admissions for the last several years, 8 years now. And this year I'm serving as our university's interim graduate advisor. So I will be leading the application review process. So in that role, I have seen hundreds, thousands of resumes over the last several years from students applying to graduate programs. I saw from the poll that most of you here tonight are looking to apply to graduate school in the very near future. So I'm going to walk through this activity. I'm hoping you all will join me, kind of help me navigate this a bit. This is an adapted resume from something that I got in the past from a former student. She was a mentee of mine, and she sent this to me to kind of get my thoughts before she submitted it to graduate programs. And I was like, wait a second, please do not send that in. And we had a meeting and we talked through this resume. So let's kind of pull it apart piece by piece here. And keeping in mind that the student's objective was to apply to a speech language pathology graduate program. And she was a returning student. She had majored in something else for her undergraduate career, did a postgrad program, and was now preparing to apply to graduate school for being an SLP. So let's take a look at just that first section. Is there anything there that you all might suggest that the student adapt? And you can drop it in the chat, or you hopefully the chat's a little easier than the Q&A, but if you can drop it in the chat, is there anything just from the name, email, photo that you might think to adapt? I'm trying to look here.
I think I'm seeing some answers in the chat, in the Q&A as well, Dr. D. So,
in the Q&A. More
yeah.
professional. Thank you. Thank you, Katie, for the Q&A. Thank you. So, should not include a photo or a more professional photo. I believe both of those. So one, she had a photo on there that was genuinely a selfie. It was like, a picture from Friday, and she had, had a beautiful smile. It was great, but it's not for a resume. Generally speaking, you don't need a photo on your resume. You should let the content speak for itself. And if you're going to include a photo, if you just feel compelled to, you cannot not include a photo. You want to include a professional headshot, something that you took for a position, and maybe they were offering headshots at that role, or something that your university did and they hosted a headshot event. You want to put that photo, certainly not a selfie. So the photo itself definitely doesn't need to be there for an SLP grad program. The next thing that I talked about with her, I see you all put that in the chat, the email, right? So she had an email on there that was, not appropriate for a professional setting. So what you want to think about is really using probably your school-based email, which tends to be a little bit more generic, first name, last name. My suggestion, if you're applying and you're in your senior year, is to make sure that you'll still have access to that email if you are going to graduate before the time that your application will be reviewed. If you won't have access to that email, then create your own email, but it should be something pretty generic, first name, last name, 01, 02, if it's something that's common. So not like I love cats or, Harry Potter forever. That's great to know, but I do want you to make sure that your email is professional. The objective here is fine. I see that the chat is now on and working. The objective here is fine if you want to include an objective on your resume. Your undergraduate degree, all that stuff is fine. Generally speaking, I also always suggest to students, if you're applying to a graduate school, you no longer need to include anything, and I mean anything from high school. you are in college or you've done a post-bac, high school is now obsolete for us. So you don't need to include any of that information. It's a great space saver so that you can include more relevant information. Let's keep going and look at the rest of the resume. And perfect. Okay, so the student had all of these experiences listed. Is there anything here that we might think to adjust slightly or think about shifting slightly because we want to kind of narrow the focus of our resume for SLP graduate school? So she had a lot of experience. I told you she had graduated from college, and she was going back to school. So she had certainly worked in between there. Removing the restaurant experience. Yes, I see that all the time in resumes. And, that's great. I love that you were a hostess. I love that you were a manager, but it's not relevant for this exact experience, right? One of the things I like to say to students who might not have a whole lot of field related experience, you want to get some field related experience, and I'll kind of talk you through how to maybe do that. But you want to maybe think about how could I weave that into a future interview or even part of my personal statement of maybe saying I have direct experience with time management because I worked part-time as a hostess at a restaurant while also maintaining a 3.5 GPA. That's how you weave in that kind of work experience and life experience, but it certainly doesn't need to go on the resume. So you're going to take any kind of restaurant, retail experience off. If you worked in any type of store, all the different fonts and colors can be visually confusing. If you keep in mind that a reviewer has probably looked at 100 resumes before they get to yours, they don't need all of the extra like readjusting to where things are on the page, right? So you just want to make it a little static, which is more helpful, and then only include field related experiences if you can. One of the things I talk about, if you don't have a lot of field related experience, it is what's today? November, whatever date of the week, November 20th. I would like you to think by next week, find somewhere that you can volunteer, go and observe, and get a routine there where you can go once a week, once every other day, whatever it might be, and just put fall 2024. And then you can make that fall 2024 to present, right? That looks a lot better than November to present, right? But putting fall 2024 to present certainly works to your advantage if you have no other field related experience. You need to have something there. And that could be observing, it could be volunteering, it could be working in a lab, but put fall 2024 to present. Let's go to the next item that they have. So she had some great service things here. What are some things that we might think to adjust based on what we've reviewed already? What do you all think? And I see a question in the chat about, does the same thing apply when you're applying for things in grad school? Should you remove college experiences? No, not necessarily. That is different. Your college experiences do matter. So I'm going to go to the chat. I see high school. Yes. And the speech observation should be at the top. They have all these great things, but the things that are not as relevant are chunked in the middle, and you can kind of miss that other more relevant experience. So anything high school related should automatically come off. I have a lot of students who are active with their churches, which is amazing. And I love that. One of the things I try to suggest is that you maybe think about being involved if your church has a disabilities ministry. And a lot of larger churches now do have those. They might have something where they'll have a summer camp for children with disabilities of their church community, or they'll be able to adapt kind of Sunday school lessons. And if they don't have that, what an amazing thing for you to maybe think about leading, right? So that's a way that you can take your active engagement in your spiritual community and adapt that so that it can be relevant for an application or for a resume. You also want to think about, you can go to the next slide. Think about the activities that this student listed. She listed all these great things, but again, some of these things, one, it was really small on the resume, so it was hard to see. But two, she still has some things that are not as relevant. And I only find out then at the very end of the student's resume that she has a whole second language that she's fluent in. My suggestion to every student applicant, and maybe we can get, if you all can give me a reaction give me a, a heart, a thumbs up, something. If you speak any other language other than English, if that is you, that needs to be at the very top of your resume. It needs to be education, language, education, your school, whatever that is, and then languages. So the reason I suggest that is that then, even if you have like some irrelevant things in your resume, you make a mistake, as a reviewer, I'm reading it and now I can't unread that this is a bilingual, multilingual applicant. I'm like, wow, that really matters. In a field where less than 10% of our practitioners do speak another language other than English, I'm like, wow, that's really valuable. And so I want to make sure now that I'm looking at this applicant through that lens because that's super exciting. I might also take out some of the activities that are less relevant. That she's, a woman's a cappella president. That's great. I love that you can sing. That's not necessarily something I would put here. If it's something that's important to you, you can certainly weave it into your personal statement and say, my experience as president of our university's a cappella group has primed me for my interest in the field in working with voice and working with singers who are having voice related issues. So you want to think about ways to include those experiences in a different way, but maybe not on the resume. And then looking at the list of activities, I'm kind of curious about what best buddies might be, right? So that sounds like something that could be field related, but there's no description with it at all to kind of help me bridge that understanding. And then if you're putting proficient in like Office, Outlook, PowerPoint, it's just not relevant any longer, right? There are other apps or other things that do things. I assume everyone has a baseline of understanding in those things. And so we don't need that, nor do we need to know certifications in CPR or first aid. If you don't have those and you need them for clinics, the school will provide that for you. Go to the next one for me. Thank you all for engaging me in that. Can you just state bilingual? I would put which language you speak to be specific. So I'm looking at the Q&A, and then I'm also looking at the next resume here. So thinking about some of these things that are really important. This is a sample resume that I got from a student a while back. Some things that are really great to highlight, right? So if you have worked as an instructional aide in a classroom of students with disabilities, if you have SLPA experience, this student put that she had experience working in Madrid, Spain. So the first thing that tells me is that this is a student who's going to be exposed to different cultures, that has some different background. That's super interesting to me. I would be curious if the student perhaps also speaks Spanish or speaks the language. So that's something I would suggest for them to put there. They put it there under skills, and you see it as the second bullet point, but I had to like search for it visually, as opposed to having a header that says languages. And then they write there fluent in Spanish, right? Let that stand out on its own. That's super important. Let's take a look at the next one. Here's another example of something that I got. This is not doctor. This is what's in the resume. So again, she was a sales associate at a store. It's just not relevant for what we're doing. You can definitely talk about that. If I use myself as an example, in my interviews for graduate school said, well, I have so much experience with time management because I was a part-time manager at Origins, which is a fancy lotion store. I was a part-time manager at Origins. I also maintained a 4.0 GPA. I was also a tutor on campus, and I worked during the summer at a camp for children with disabilities. So you can talk about that experience, weave that into your personal statement, but let the resume really shine for your field-related experiences. Go to the next one for me, please. I see this is the rest of that resume that the student had. So you just want to make sure that you're putting things that are most pertinent toward the top, right? So she had her retail experience before her volunteer experience as being with Children's Hospital of Orange County. That's certainly much more important. That's a really great volunteer experience to have. So put those things toward the top. I often tell students, generally your resume should be no more than 2 pages maximum, and that's only if you have significant experience that's in the field. Likely, you probably only need 1 page worth, but some students do have more experiences. You want to think about your committee who's reviewing. Again, they've looked at lots and lots of files. You don't want to exhaust them, telling them, too many things and things that are maybe not fully relevant. So stick to the things that are most important, most exciting, and put those toward the top. Go to the next one for me. This is another example, great student that I had in the past. She was an undergrad student of mine and then went on to graduate school. One of the things that you'll notice that she does when she put in her current undergraduate work, she put in her GPA because it was so high. Right. So that's something that can certainly stand out. If you have a really high GPA, you might want to put your current GPA there. If you don't have such a great GPA, you don't want to put that in there because then, you don't necessarily want to lead with that. You want to lead with other things, your experiences, the languages you speak. So if your GPA is something that's high, that's something you might want to put there as a bullet point in your education background. She has her work experience. She had, look at all of this volunteer experience that is field related, but that comes after working as a cashier and a freelance tutor. I would absolutely flop those things, if not completely getting rid of the work experience there. Also, because she has so many things under volunteer academic experience, I would probably get rid of work experience altogether, make one section volunteer experience and one section academic experience. So that way those separate experiences pop out a bit more because they're so much more valuable than knowing that you were a cashier. Again, I worked in school. I worked at Lady Foot Locker. I worked at Origins. I've done retail work. That doesn't appear on my resume for SLP related items. It just is not as relevant. You can go to the next slide for me. I'm trying to keep up with the Q&A as I go. I just kind of touched on this. Critical information should not be hidden on page 2. I talked about this about having a 2-page resume. One, if you look at the first page, the whole work experience could probably come out and she could separate it into volunteer and academic experience. But I get to page 2 and she's got whole like research experience. I've got that. She's fluent in Vietnamese. I'm just shocked, right? All of these things that I find out on page 2. These things need to be on page 1. Please, 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 if you get nothing else from this workshop tonight, if you speak another language, it needs to go on the first page and it needs to go right under your education background so that we know as we read the rest of it that this is a bilingual, multilingual applicant. So again, all of those things that are most important, that are critical, should certainly not be on page 2. Okay. I see a note about a sorority and community service. If that service is field related, certainly put that there. If it's not as field related, I would put your field related experiences first and then put that other experience toward the bottom. If you're not a native or bilingual speaker, should you include it in some way? I think that that is valuable. If you put, I've had students put languages and they'll put native speaker, fluent, then they'll put moderate level of proficiency. You certainly can categorize it in that way. One of the things I tend to see often is that my students who are native speakers are still uncomfortable identifying themselves as native speakers. It's a phenomenon that goes on. I will say the same for me. I was first learned Spanish in middle and high school. I did some extensive amount of volunteer work at an early childhood center working with Spanish speaking populations. I majored in Spanish in college. I lived abroad in Madrid. And then when it came to placements and wanting to be considered for things, I said, oh, well, I speak Spanish, but not like really. And that's an insane thought, right? So again, you speak more of that language than someone who has no exposure of that language. Even if you did not have, I have a whole undergraduate degree in Spanish, but even if you did not have that, you should certainly credit that skill for yourself. That's definitely something that's important. And go to the next slide. As this other example, I wanted to include something of a student who maybe came from a different background. So you have the student who has a psychology-based background. Include both. If you certainly did like a post-bac program, that should be listed as well. I've had students who, for example, had an undergraduate degree in something else. Their overall GPA wasn't that great because they weren't, as into the major. And then they put their post-bac program and they'll say 3.9 or 4.0 GPA there. And then in your personal statement, if your GPA is overall GPA and your SLP specific or AUD specific GPA is higher, mention that, right? So you want to kind of call out the elephant in the room, which is something that can help. I always say if there's something in your resume or in your transcript that you feel is might be a weakness, call attention to it yourself and don't let the committee make its own ideas about that thing. Say it. And I always tell students you get 1 to 2 sentences max to bring it up, because if the committee is going to consider you in spite of that, they're going to consider you after 1 to 2 sentences. You don't have to spend, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs talking about why something is the way it is on your resume. If you are doing experiences, again, clinic assistant, research assistant, that needs to come pretty early. I tend to tell students not to include things like childcare provider or nannying, because that's really not the center of what we do, unless you are doing those things with children with disabilities. That would be something that would be relevant. So you want to think about, and I saw some of you in the poll are considering about your resume for the future. If you're thinking about your resume now and you're like, oh, wow, I do a lot of part-time work and I don't have a lot of field-related experience, start gaining that now. And it doesn't have to be that you're working in something or volunteering in something for 20, 30 hours a week. I had a student years ago who would come and volunteer at my clinic literally 1 day a month, and she did it for a year. And so she would come 1 Saturday a month for a year. And after that year, I wrote her a glowing letter of recommendation, and she was able to put on her resume that she had been at this place for a year, right? So it doesn't have to be a large time commitment. You want the quality of what you're doing there to be substantial. And you also want to look more at how long you've been someplace. So sometimes I'll see resumes and students will have, they were at X hospital for 2 months, and then X private practice for 2 months, and then X private practice for 3 months. And it's just like 10 experiences, but they're all really short. I tend to think that having lengthier experiences that are more meaningful allows you to cultivate more relationships in that location. Also think that where you're volunteering and observing and doing research, these are potential letters of recommendation, right? You want to get to know these people. So you don't want to have these really short stints. You want to maybe have longer stints that are more meaningful. Go to the next one for me. And then just some more ideas there about thinking through, again, the student has bilingual English and Spanish at the very end of the resume. Every time I see that, it just breaks my heart. So please put languages up toward the top. That is really important. And that is, if you look at ASHA's website, the demographics of students that we're trying to recruit and retain, they are male, they're underrepresented minorities, and they are bilingual, multilingual professionals. So please put that. That is something that is critically important. Go to the next one for me. Perfect. Okay, I made it through. I think you all had some great questions. I will take a look at the chat. I see if you're applying for a CF, would you still include your graduation year and GPA from undergrad? That's maybe less relevant because we assume you made it through undergrad in your undergrad program, so it's less relevant. And then for CFs, I did see a few of in the poll who were doing that. For CFs, I would center your resume more on experiences that you've had with clients as opposed to other experiences, volunteering. You maybe want to center it on, I've worked with kids with apraxia, I've worked with adults with certain neurological conditions. You want to include those bullet points on your resume so that your potential supervisors see that.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. D. So now that we've had a really great overview, we're going to get started with kind of the question portion of the evening. We've already kind of had this rolling already, but you guys have given us some great questions already. We have a couple different sections we'll work through, but at any time throughout the evening, feel free to drop those in the Q&A. And so we have a few pre-selected questions for our panelists to discuss and kind of start some discussion. But once we ask questions, like I said, you can add any extra. And yeah, so be sure to also read questions that are in the Q&A and upvote your favorite. So if you see something that someone else mentioned, make sure to upvote that so we know that a lot of people want that answered.
Yeah, so like Katie was saying, we have a few different topics that we're going to cover tonight. Our first one is going to be starting with what professionals look for in a resume and CV. So like Katie was saying, go ahead and start putting some questions that you really want answered in the Q&A box and upvote the ones that you want the most. But we're going to get started with some pre-selected questions. And my first one is for Dr. Joseph. So, Dr. Joseph, what experiences do you look for in a strong resume and CV?
Great question. So, as the person who is responsible for hiring new employees, new staff, new leadership to my team. It's really important for me that when I'm looking at your resume, that your resume actually coincides with the actual job description. So, for example, if you are coming to work for my pediatrics mobile speech and hearing clinic, I would like to see more information from you about the pediatric services that you have provided in the past, because I want to know that whoever I'm hiring already has the experience to work with peds and and I won't have to do as much training when it comes to, how we treat pediatric patients. Now, with that being said, the resume for me as an employer is only about 20% of importance when it comes to hiring a professional. What's most important to me is that they actually fit within my organizational culture. And that's something that you guys are going to see a lot when it comes to time for you to actually become professionals in your career. You're going to hear more about companies focusing on organizational culture, as opposed to just competence, because I've had experiences where I've had professionals who are damn good. They look damn good on a resume, but when it comes to actually putting them um, in front of pediatrics or even adult patients who are from my area. I'm from New Orleans. My practice is in New Orleans, mainly, and our culture is different. You know, you walk in the room, you say good morning. I've had patients complain when I've had people who are professionals from other areas come in and they don't say good morning. I literally had to train one of my team members from Texas on that. Like, no, 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 no. When you walk in this room, you make sure you tell everyone good morning. And he adjusted to the culture. And every morning he would walk into the clinic and say, good morning, everybody, really, really loud, no matter who. It could be one person in the office. He would say, good morning, everybody. But that also proves that he was a good team player and he wanted to be there. He wanted to adjust to the organizational culture, and it was important to him. So definitely keep that in mind. But as you're putting these resumes together, make sure that it matches the exact job that you're applying for. If you're applying for a vestibular job, make sure you have vestibular experience on there. If you're applying for a job in the school system, show your school experience. It really makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. That was really incredible advice, and I think it really pairs well with a lot of what Dr. Doherty was saying earlier with the resume she was highlighting. So the next question we have is for Jamila, and it is, what experiences do you look for on a strong resume in CV? And is there anything that you recommend students not include in their resume?
Okay, so I think everything is dependent on what you're applying for. As Dr. Joseph just mentioned, if you're applying for a position that is serving pediatric clients, or if you're applying for a position that has a high population of Spanish speakers, or if you're applying for a position that is in a hospital and you've had some very unique experience, the important thing is to know what job you're applying for, what they're looking for, and then whatever you have that's a strength for you, make sure that you're including that, and you're including it, as Dr. Dory said, up high on the resume so that people can see that information on the first page. Also, there's a resource that ASHA has, and thank you for just dropping that in the chat. The Job Seeker Toolkit, and it brings together several resources on ASHA's career portal. And one of them is a really good article about decoding job descriptions, because you have to remember nowadays you're not probably going to hand your resume to a person. You're going to be applying online. So you need to get past the applicant tracking system, which is the computer, which will read your resume and say, these words match what we're looking for. So you need to make sure that those things are included on your resume. And then also you need to understand the difference between a resume and a CV and which one is appropriate for each position. So if you are planning to go into academia, then most likely you do want to use a CV because that's where you can include things such as presentations, publications, if you've had any type of teaching experience, anything like that. That's usually a longer, more I don't not want to say complete, but it gives a bigger picture of the entirety of your career. And as a person applying to a CF, or if you're applying to graduate school, you would not need to focus on a CV. You want to focus on having a good resume. And when you ask the question of something to definitely not include, again, it's gonna sound simple, but misspelled words, poor grammar, um, a lot of fancy fonts, things of that nature. Again, remember that you're thinking about, I need to get past this computer so that then I can get to a person. And then when you get to that person, they're only going to have so much time and they're going to be skimming and looking for what's relevant to them. So you want to make sure that you're using lots of different resources and applying when you're applying for jobs and looking at resumes and structuring those resumes that so that they'll be appropriate for that position.
Thank you so much. That is a great explanation, especially with the difference between CVs and a resume. So thank you for sharing your insight. Our next question is from Mary Louise, and it was, what would you recommend for sophomores and undergrad to start doing to stand out and gain experiences?
That's a great question. So, I think at this point, I would try to make sure that you have diverse experience on your resume. So I always tell students to look at the different areas that are on a resume. So work experience, volunteer experience, service experience, all of these things, extracurricular activities, whatever your resume breakdown is, or some of the resume breakdowns that we saw today, and think of, do I have something that could potentially go in every area? Make sure that you have a diverse, that you're really engaging in diverse experiences and activities. So, if you have a lot of work experience, right, but no service experience, or you're not doing any type of community engagement or extracurricular activities or anything like that, then maybe you want to start working on some of those things. So when I was reading the chat, I was just skimming the chat during the presentation, and I was seeing a lot of students saying, I don't have experience in all of these things. What do I do if I don't have experience in these things? And so my first step to tell you would be to try to get experience in some of these things. How can you engage in these different areas to get diversity in your experience? Now, once you become a senior, or even maybe later into your junior year, that may be a little bit more challenging. So I would, like Dr. D said, I would, focus on, what are the, how can I, what are the transferable skills from what I've been doing, right? So, so I'll give you an example. So before I did not have a background in speech pathology, so I'll just say that. So I'm kind of speaking from experience here. My background was psychology. And so I felt like I kind of, was a little bit behind everyone because I didn't have all of this speech experience that some of my peers had. However, I had lots of extracurricular activities, lots of service activities. I had done an AmeriCorps service program. I had studied abroad. I had been an intern in HR for General Electric. And so I had a lot of strong experience, but it wasn't speech related. And so in that instance, what I did was I took my first piece of advice was I tried to get some experience in the speech world. So reaching out to people, making cold calls, just asking if you can go and observe, if you can volunteer, if you can do these things. I think that would be the first step. But then I had to realize, what are the transferable skills that I have from this experience or these experiences that I've had, and how can I kind of twist them to relate to the field that I'm going into? And I want to try to highlight that on my resume.
Thank you so much for that response. Absolutely love how you talked about, non-CSD field related experiences and especially how they could be applicable on the resume. And that kind of brings me to a point which I want to ask anyone on the panel. How do you recommend that a student, present their resume? Should it be chronological? How would you go about, taking those experiences and highlighting them the best you can?
I generally suggest starting with the item that is the biggest highlight, right? So I tend to suggest to students, if whatever you think is most important, you want to make sure that they read, put that earlier in the resume. Again, you want to think about not, oh, this is my resume. You want to think about, this is number like 99 of the 100 they're going to review. And if they see that, I want them to like make sure that they read at the very top after my name, what is my most like incredible experience that I would have to share. That would be my suggestion. And then in each section, right? So think again, you might have again volunteer experience, research experience, work experience, and or field related experience, field related work experience. When you start to put those in by section, in the section, keep it consistent throughout the whole resume. So if you start, oldest to most current, then keep that throughout. I tend to suggest to start from most current to oldest, just because I think it's a little bit more relevant. But if you have some incredible volunteer experience or field related work experience, put that section first before you put leadership or other things that you might have there.
And I'd just like to add, I know that there was Allison, I believe, put that in the chat up about resume writing strategies, but also I'd encourage you to do some research or use our friendly chat GPT AI to understand the differences between a chronological versus a skill-based or functional resume. So a lot of us kind of grew up, if you're like me anyway, I won't go into my age, but I'm a Gen Xer. So I grew up seeing like chronological, you start from the most recent and you go down, you keep going backwards. Well, now again, you're dealing with a computer. You want to put those things that are most relevant again. So that's where a skills-based or functional-based resume can be to your advantage, because as Dr. D mentioned, if there's some really unique experience that you've had, something that's very relevant to the position or something that can help you stand out from the crowd, you want to include those things first. So, and you can still use headers and things of that nature, but you don't necessarily have to think like, I did this in 2024 and then I did this in 2023 and put it in that order. You want to put it in the order of what's going to be most important to the computer and to the person reviewing it.
I'd like to add something as well. I wrote this down just to say it. Particularly for those who are going into a CF position or a fourth year, keep in mind that when we're looking at you guys to potentially take you on as part of our team, you're no longer students. We're not looking at your resume because we're seeking a perfect student who has straight A's and a 4.0 GPA and has done this and that at church and just looks like the perfect Patty. No, we're looking for well-rounded professionals. And we want those people that can actually adjust to different situations, not necessarily looking for those who are A+ students and perfect students and have done this and that perfectly. We're seeking students who have experienced challenges and have overcome those challenges. We're looking for people who have practiced resilience and are good communicators. Those are some skills that you definitely want to highlight. Now, again, your resume is a small part. It's an important part. Nonetheless, it's a small part of the entire process. But it's very important. It is the first image that you are giving. It's, you're not going to necessarily be in front of those decision makers immediately. So it has to show you in the best light. But we're looking. So I know we had mentioned before, Dr. D, when she was presenting, had mentioned about, hey, if you got a GPA of a 3.0, you might not necessarily want to highlight it so much. But if you have a 4.0, definitely highlight it. And she's absolutely right. But I also want you guys to know, especially for those who don't have the 4.0s, highlight your skills that show your resilience. Highlight skills that show that you're a good communicator. Yes, I might have made a 3.0, but look, it's because I was working while I was going to school. I had a full-time job, and at nighttime, maybe I was well, I won't say bartender. That's probably not in line with a good example, right? But maybe I had a night job at the hospital, and I was able to help lots of patients at the hospital. And because of this, I now can prove to you that I'm showing resilience, I'm showing dependability, because not only was I working at the hospital, but I was going to school. And yeah, I might have made a 3.0, but guess what? I did it with those different barriers, those challenges, and I overcame them. And someone like that, for me, is someone who fits better within my culture, because I know that they'll be willing, especially with the current environment and atmosphere that we're in with COVID happening. I was in business in 2020 and had to pivot quickly when COVID happened. We want those types of people. We want people that are able to pivot quickly and adapt and adjust as needed. So just wanted to throw that out there.
And I also just wanted to add about not being the perfect student or having the perfect resume. I know earlier we talked about tailoring your resume to the job that you want, but as a medical speech pathologist, I know that medical placements are really hard to come by, particularly after COVID. And I hear feedback from a lot of students saying, I didn't get a medical placement when I was in grad school, or I got very little adult experience when I was in grad school, and now I feel like I'll never be a medical SLP, or I don't know what to put on my resume because I haven't had that experience. And so just know that when hospitals and medical facilities are looking at your resume, they know these limitations, right? Because we've experienced them also. And so, we recognize that, and we're not looking for someone who's coming with only adult experience, or someone who's worked at 3 hospitals, had placements at 3 hospitals already, not looking for that at all. And like Dr. Joseph says, I would rather see, I'd rather see a student that has different skills, right? Their resume is such a small part of the hiring process, right? Or the selection process. I'd rather see a student that can show me resilience, that can show me teamwork, that can show me collaboration, right? And when they come into the interview, they're able to talk about these things, than a student that has this perfect resume. They've interned at 3 hospitals or 2 hospitals or whatever. I'd much rather see a student that has some of those transferable skills and fits more within the work culture. So I've had students who have been to hospital placements before, and I interview them, and I'm asking them, like, so tell me what you are interested in learning, and they're kind of like, well, I don't need to learn anything because I've had all these hospital placements, right? That is going to go in my no pile, as opposed to a student who's like, I've had no hospital placements, but I've been to this conference, I've shadowed at this place, I've done this CEU, and I'm open to learning. I've done this research or whatever in this area. That is someone that I'm going to look at, because it shows a little bit more grit, if you will, that this is something that they're really passionate about. And the last thing I'll say is don't forget about continuing education, even for students, right? I'd love to see a student who may not have that medical experience, but they can tell me that they've been doing some continuing education. They've been to a conference. They've been to ASHA. They've been to National Black Association for Speech, Language, and Hearing Convention. They've done some of the Passimure CEUs online. Like, they have done some continuing education. That shows me that they are really a go-getter and independent, and they're really hungry for this knowledge and for this I guess, sector of our field. So definitely don't forget continuing education, even as students, right? It's still important, and it shows that that you're willing to go above and beyond.
Incredible. Thank you guys so much for all of your input on that question. That was awesome to hear. I do want to remind everybody that in the webinar chat, there's really important links that have been put in there. I know there's been some on some resume strategies and some other things that may be really good to check out. So be sure to give that a look. As always, use the Q&A chat for any questions that you have that you want to ask the panelist. With that being said, we have a few extra minutes left on this topic before transitioning. Katie, do you have any questions from the audience?
Saw a good question that Dr. Joseph actually went ahead and started to answer, and I think this would be a really great one to bring up to have on the recording as well. Someone asked, they only have maybe 1 or 2 relevant field experiences, but they do have some work experience that they want to fill that first page of their resume. They're applying during the cycle, so maybe we're under that time crunch. How would you recommend maybe getting more experience, but also, I know we said maybe don't put that job experience. How would you recommend maybe working that in if they feel like this still speaks a lot to what I have to offer as an applicant, and it's one of the things that I feel like can really fill out my resume?
I'll just add, I think in situations like this, now, just for clarity, are they applying for a CF or applying
Applying for
for
graduate school. So I
graduate
think that's
school?
kind of the
Okay.
position they're coming from for
Okay.
graduate school.
So similar to graduate school, you have to write a letter of interest. Most graduate schools write, or a personal statement or something to that effect. And with jobs, you write a cover letter, which is basically the same thing. So this is where I would take advantage of that personal statement to give the information as to why you are applying to graduate school. Because again, as someone mentioned, every stage of your journey you're going to be a different persona. So when you're an undergrad, you're a student and you're trying to get into graduate school. So you're trying to show the department that you are a student that can work hard, you can learn, you can succeed, you have something also to offer to the program. When you are going into your job, then now you're no longer a student. You're or once you get into graduate school, in my mind, you're now a pre-professional. That's how I look at people who are in graduate school, because you're a graduate clinician, you're a pre-professional, and you're getting ready to go into the profession. And so now you're in a new persona. And so when you get ready to apply to your first job, or like if you're an audiology student, you're applying to that 4th-year externship, now they're looking for that person who is going to come in and be a professional. And a lot of times, if you're a clinical fellowship year, it is an opportunity for you to still learn, but you're applying for a job. So it's important to remember, those different stages. So if you're an undergrad and you're trying to get into graduate school, what are the things that are going to speak to your ability to succeed in the program? And you want to include those things in your resume if available. If you've done something really unique, any type of volunteerism, things of that nature, any specific jobs, if you've done, some shadowing, if you've worked with a professor, if you've done some research or presentations, things that stand out. And then you also want to include in your personal statement why you want to be a part of this program.
Thank you, Jamila, for answering that, and thank all of you guys for getting a good kickstart off to our Q&A portion. Now that we've learned a little bit more about what professionals are looking for in a resume and CV, we're going to transition into our next portion of tonight's Q&A session by looking at resume length. And Jamila kind of got us started. All of the questions were geared around what exactly are you looking for if you're applying for a CF versus applying to graduate school. And so our first question is a little similar. So Mary Louise, how should we approach resume length? Is it different for a graduate school or a CF or externship or even jobs?
I don't think so. I think, like Dr. D said, making your resume one page is, I think, your best bet. That's what I always recommend to students coming into grad school and students who are starting to look for jobs, looking for CFs. I think one page is always going to be your best bet. It's short and sweet. If you do go into that second page, make sure that it's very relevant, very strong information, right, that you're adding to your resume. I would not have 2 pages and you have information like I was a restaurant server or, I worked at Target or something like that. Those are things that I would not put on my resume. And I would not have those things take me into the second page. Sometimes I get students' resumes who are 2 pages long and I get to that second page and I'm just like I wish you had made this into one page. One page is just so easy. It's easy on the eye. You don't have things to flip. And it really condenses your information into only the strong stuff, right? And so I know when I'm reading this, every line is going to pack a punch because only what is important is on here versus when I get a 2-page resume and I finish it and I'm just kind of like, I wish you had gotten that all on one page because the second page isn't strong, right? So I really don't think, I think that is just good advice for anyone going into any industry, right? Whether it be a student, whether you're going, starting your CF, try to get it to one page. Now, obviously, as you get older, as you get more experience, your resume length is going to get longer. Like Jamila said, particularly once you start making like a CV, if you're going into academia and you're doing publications and presentations, we expect it to get over 2 pages. But at this point, right, unless you have had a whole second career, and you really can add a lot of strong things to your resume, most everyone's resume should be one page, I think.
Great. Thank you for providing your insight on that. Now I have a general question open to the panel. As far as resume length goes and what exactly should be included, how far back do you all recommend that a resume should go? And what things should be on a resume versus getting cut? We had an example in the chat. I know a lot of people from the Q&A asked, for example, say you're applying to a fourth-year externship. Should you include things from your undergrad or only go from experiences during grad school?
Depends on if it's relevant. So I think the experience, and I think Katie was unmuting there too, speaking about the fourth, but I think it depends on if it's relevant. So certainly, again, nothing from high school, and I maybe wouldn't even go, depending on how deeply relevant it is, going back to college. But if you're applying for your fourth year externship and you had an experience in year one that was like really meaningful and deep, then include that because that's something that would still be pertinent.
And then Kennedy, I don't know if we also got a kind of a continuation of that question. Related to that, we had some students asking about applying for grad school. How would you maybe suggest they position observation hours they did in high school? Maybe as if they don't want to show, oh, it's a longer time ago, but that's still a very relevant experience and they felt like it filled their resume out well. How would you say maybe they weave that into some of their other observations?
So I'll use myself as an example, and I did lots of volunteer hours and work hours in high school at a private practice here in Los Angeles. But I also kept volunteering there in the summer. So I went away to school. When I would come back home to visit, I would go volunteer for a week or go observe for a week. So then when I had my resume, I was saying, oh, from, X year to present. And then I could date all of that and include all of that together. So I wouldn't necessarily think to include it if it's no longer current, but if you still have a relationship there and you volunteer or observe, please then include the years then. And then I think that's helpful to show like a real relationship that you built with that site, that center, that supervisor, that you've been there over this amount of time.
Thank you so much for answering both the first and the follow-up question. That was great insight. Okay, so now I am going to pivot to Katie. I'm going to ask, are there any questions in the Q&A that are applicable to this topic that should be asked right now?
Look over, people have been doing such a good job of answering them live time. So I'm like trying to see if there's any really good answers I want to highlight, kind of bring up. I think we've covered a lot of this. I'm seeing a few questions about CV. So we've touched on this a bit. We've put some information resource in the chat specifically about writing CV. So if anyone has anything they'd love to share about that, but at least from my experience, I know most graduate schools, it's usually more of a resume focus. So if someone wants to speak more on that, but I think we've covered that CV topic decently. And we also have some really good references in our talk too.
I'll just reiterate because I keep seeing that people are trying to use CV and resume interchangeably. And again, they're two different documents. So at this stage of your career, more than likely, you're going to be using a resume. Once you, like, say you go to get your doctorate degree or you go into academia in some other way, and you want to show this breadth of experience, that's what I was trying to say earlier. You want to show that you have publications, you've done presentations, maybe you have honors and awards that are relevant to this position. Then you will want to focus on doing a CV. So they're two very different documents. And it's important to understand the difference. It's not only for academia, but say if you're going into a leadership role or you're much further down your career, and again, still even at that point, is the information relevant? So, but typically you're going to see CVs when you're applying for academic positions. And again, maybe if you're applying for some type of very senior leadership type of role, but most jobs, in our profession, you're going to use a resume.
Thank you so much for highlighting that difference. I think it's really important to talk about, especially because sometimes it can be confusing, especially as a student. So thank y'all for your insight on resume length. Now we're going to transition into our next topic, which is looking at different resumes being used for different purposes. And Jamila, you already kind of got us started, but I'm going to ask a little bit of a different question for you. And it is, do you have any strategies for how someone can tailor their resume? Such as, do you really need to have separate resumes for separate positions?
Absolutely. So again, it depends on, I wouldn't say separate positions, so much so as separate maybe settings or separate populations. So if I'm speaking specifically to our field, and I'm a speech language pathologist, so I can only speak from the speech language pathologist perspective and my experience. But if you're applying for a school, your resume shouldn't look the same as it would look as if you were applying for a hospital. Now, the caveat to that is, let's say you're applying for, I'm going to say a pediatric hospital, and you've worked in a school where you've had some experiences, maybe with feeding or maybe some other relevant experience that would transfer, like I think someone mentioned those transferable skills, then your resume may look similar, but in general, I always try to have like a template and then I'll have different versions so I can update it to make it specific to the position that I'm applying for. So even if it's a school, again, if they have a high population of maybe children with autism and you have that experience, you want to highlight that for that particular school. Whereas in another school, maybe they have a high population of children who speak multiple languages and you're bilingual or you have some experiences there, then you want to highlight that. So I think it's just always thinking about, if I were taking the position of a person who was going to hire me, what information would I want that person to have? Or what experiences would I want them to have? And then how do you demonstrate that on paper? And again, so I forget who said it, but again, I think it was Dr. Joseph also said that it's important to remember your resume is a very important piece, but it is a small piece, but it's the piece that opens the door. So once you get in the door, then you have the opportunity to sell yourself and give more information, add more detail, add more color to the things and experiences that you've had. But that resume is what's going to unlock the key to the door.
That is incredible advice. Thank you. Our next question is actually for Dr. Joseph, and it is, as being a CSD professional who has also founded your own business, which is incredible, do you have any advice on, how to translate your skills to new positions, especially if they seem out of the norm for our profession?
I literally was just answering a question that was similar to that in the chat. It's really important. Again, I'll go back to that word culture. It's very important for you to make sure that wherever you decide to go to work, that it's something that fits within your culture. And by culture, I'm not talking about race. Let me be clear. Culture is behavior. Culture is what you believe. Culture is so many different things. The way you speak to people. It's just so many things, right? And you want to make sure that wherever you go, that the company that you're going to actually fits within what you're looking for. So my example was in grad school, I actually ended up transferring within my graduate program. I started off at Lamar University. It did not fit within my culture, and I ended up transferring over to WashU in St. Louis, Missouri, and that's where I graduated from. But I always knew that I wanted to go into private practice. And the interesting part of that was before I even applied to audiology school, I also had my master's. So when I say I knew I wanted to go into private practice, I knew I wanted to go into private practice. And let me just clarify, it was a master's in business, not in speech language pathology, although I wish I had. But that's a topic for another conversation. But when I did transfer over to WashU is such a research-based institution. Private practice was not something that WashU even thought about. I don't even think we had a course on it. So it was really difficult for me to adjust to the research-based environment, to share with my professors that I was interested in, for them to figure out where my interest was, and how to even assist me with that. So that was difficult. That was a cultural thing. That's something I did not know then. I know now, and I encourage you guys to look into that as well. But the same thing will apply with your job when it comes to your job. When you come to where you're applying to, you want to make sure that everything fits within what you're looking for and what they're looking for. Did I answer that question well enough?
Yes, you answered that
Okay.
perfectly. Thank you so much. Yes,
Sure.
and we have some other questions. I've seen a lot of people in the chat kind of asking about, I don't really have a lot of experience in this, but I'm really interested. And Mary Louise, you kind of touched on it earlier, how when you're looking for people for, job applications, you want someone that has that passion and that has that drive to learn and dedication. So how can a student really make themselves stand out without that direct experience in their desired field?
Yeah, I think any type of related activity that they can engage in is great. So I have a lot of students who are interested in medical speech pathology, and maybe they're working as CNAs, right? So on the weekends, they're working as CNAs. That is very impressive to me, right? Because it tells me they know their way around a hospital. So you might not have the speech experience, but I'm not going to have to show you, how to adjust the bed, where the call light is, how to communicate with nurses and doctors, things like that. And so it's not direct experience, but it's very, very strong experience. And so, truthfully, if I'm looking for a student to hit the ground, or a professional to hit the ground running in like acute care or a rehab hospital, I'm more likely to hire someone who's worked in a hospital as like a CNA or some other ancillary service, maybe like a dietitian or something like that, as opposed to someone who has had a hospital placement, right? Because that's going to show me not only do you have experience in the hospital, but this is professional working experience too. So think about anything that you may have done that may be related to a hospital experience. For those of you who haven't had any working experience in a hospital, again, shadowing is a great opportunity. A lot of places, even though they may not be accepting a student, they may be open to having you come and shadow. So consider that on summer break, winter break, spring break, fall break, whatever. Maybe use that time to go and shadow. The other thing that I'm looking for is someone who is willing to go above and beyond to do that research and to learn about the medical side of things or working with adults, right? What conferences have you been to? What CEUs have you been to? That's often an interview question I might ask. So tell me about the last CEU that you did. Tell me about a professional conference that you've been to. And I get a lot of students who say, I've never been to a professional conference, right? Not terrible, not a deal breaker, right? But try to go to a conference only because they're a lot cheaper as students too. So it's a great opportunity for you to get that experience, the same experience that you get as a professional, but for like half the price or a fraction of the price, right? So I tell all my students, please go to conferences. It's not a deal breaker if you've never been to one, but what a great way to get experience and education and to network with people. That's another thing, right? So you may not have gotten the placement, but do you know someone who can vouch for you, vouch for your work ethic, vouch for your character? Someone who may be willing to take you under their wing, like a mentor in that field, right? So I promise you, it's less about the placement that you get in graduate school. Those are important, right? But I've hired so many people to work in the hospitals who have never stepped foot in a hospital before, but it's something about them where they've been able to show me that this is something that they're really interested in and that they've done the work. Just to demonstrate how passionate they are about working with adults, working in a medical facility. So I just really encourage students to focus less on your placement, even though that's important. If you have the opportunity to do that, you want to take it. But we all understand how scarce those opportunities can be. And there are other things that you can do to help build your resume and build your experience.
Thank you so much for that advice. I know personally for me, I would have loved to have heard that a few years ago. So I hope you guys on the call today are getting a lot of solace from all of the incredible perspectives we've had tonight. We are now going to transition into our final little topic and Q&A session of the night. And given all the great insights, we have a few more last questions. If you have anything that has not been answered in the Q&A box, please go ahead and put it there. Upvote it if you really want it answered. But we're going to start off with a few questions we have pre-populated. And the first one is for Dr. Doherty, and it is, what are some of the best skills that you have seen highlighted on a resume, and how should a student or someone applying for a job phrase it and approach putting them on the resume?
So you're going to be sick of me saying this, but languages. So I always am excited to see languages there. I also look sometimes for students who are part of the multicultural constituency group. So I'll look in on the resume and they have that they're a student member of the National Black Association for Speech, Language, and Hearing, or the Hispanic Caucus. I look at that. I look and see sometimes students who have taken advantage of things in those caucus groups. So things like they have attended a conference, or they were awarded a scholarship award, or they presented, or they presented in a virtual conference with one of those multicultural constituency groups. That's super important. So that's something that you might consider joining or including. I'll also add, kind of tacking on to what Mary Louise mentioned about attending conferences. It might be that you can't afford a national conference like ASHA, but even your state association is amazing to go to and super, connected to where you are. I would suggest to every student to Google your university and travel assistant fees to conferences. Almost every university has some kind of program that will help you get to a conference. Different universities have different kind of funding mechanisms or guidelines. Some will require that you are presenting at a conference to get funding, but I've seen universities that will actually just fund for you to go. So these are the types of things that are included in your student fees. So take advantage of those things, go and you can have a great experience, exactly what Mary Louise mentioned about being able to network, connect with people. There are many, many times that I've had students at conferences and they have gotten into our grad program because they met someone at that conference who they made a personal connection with, who was on the review committee, or they were admitted to a program and got into someone's research lab and got a graduate research assistantship because of that. So certainly take advantage of that. Other things that I would look to highlight on a resume, again, anything that is field related, that is direct client care. So working with populations, working more than shadowing. I think when I think of shadowing or observing, I think of, you're a fly on the wall. If you've done that for a bit, that's great. Ask that practitioner, can I do something more hands-on? Can I help to prepare materials? Can I, serve as a conversation partner during your therapy activity task? Think of something that's active that you can do, because that's going to look a lot more active on the resume than shadowing or observing. That would be one of my suggestions as well.
I'd like to add to what Dr. D said too, about possibly joining groups that like some of the multicultural diversity organizations. Even if you're not a member of a multicultural a multicultural group, you can still join that organization. And let me tell you, that shows cultural competency. You should definitely look into that. Just because these different groups might be called, the Hispanic Caucus or the Black Association of Speech Language Pathology and Audiology. It doesn't matter. Like, you can still join, and again, it's because when it's time for you to get into job opportunities, we're looking for people who can relate to everybody. Especially if you're applying to jobs in inner city jobs, right? Rural jobs might be different, but if you're applying to a job in New Orleans, you're applying to a job in Los Angeles, we need you to be able to talk to everybody, no matter what they look like. And those patients, most importantly, need to be able to relate to you. I will say that, again, I don't know if it's a New Orleans thing, but we don't have much problems with that when it comes to practitioners from New Orleans actually joining High Level Speech and Hearing Center, because we call ourselves a gumbo city because we're all so blended. And it's true, it's very true. It's a skill though, it's a skill. I remember when I went to St. Louis and I was interning at St. Louis University, my supervisor pulled me in one day and he said, "Hey, I need you to stop being so nice." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, what do you mean? That's odd, that's strange." And he's like, "Yeah, you're just too nice." And that's just part of my New Orleans culture. I understood later on what he was saying, that as a professional, and you guys will learn this too in your careers, sometimes you don't want to be so accessible to people. And that's just to establish rapport and also respect. But I knew how to speak to everybody. That's really what was going on. And I didn't mind speaking to everybody. I didn't mind if you were a janitor or if you were the otolaryngologist that was working around the corner in the other office, right? It didn't matter. I spoke to everyone. I respected them all the same. And usually when you surround yourself by people who have different experiences, again, it's not about the race, it's about experiences. It's about how you were raised and how I was raised and how we're able to sit down and have lunch together because we can share those experiences and have a good time. That's what creates your ability to become a good communicator with all of your patients. And I just wanted to make sure I just kind of reiterated what Dr. D already said.
Yes, we are so happy that you took the time to reiterate it too. That was great. Thank you guys both for highlighting such wonderful skills that definitely should be prioritized. With other things that often are prioritized in the application process of graduate programs, we know that many students have observation hours as they're pursuing their SLP and audiology degrees, as Dr. Doherty said. Mary Louise, what is the best way to actually document these observation hours on a resume?
So that's a good question. So I definitely would add them to my resume, perhaps under clinical experience. Just make sure that you are noting that they are, in fact, observation hours. I also think it's important to include like guided observation hours. So ASHA calls them guided observation hours, and they require them in order for them to count towards your observation that they be guided. And I think that adds in a lot into what Dr. D was saying about having more of an active role. So you're not just there watching, but that you've discussed what you've seen with someone and what you're doing. And I think that's really important just to show that you just weren't there and sitting, right? So I like to use like guided observation, like the word guided observation when I document it on my resume. So, if you, especially if you had unique experiences, right? So perhaps if maybe not necessarily if I was doing like a clinical simulation, but if I actually got to go into the facility and I established a great relationship with the SLP, and maybe I went above and beyond 25 guided observation hours, it's definitely something that I might include. I might include on my resume. I'm just making sure that I'm very clear that those were guided observation hours as opposed to like a true like clinical experience or clinical placement.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the clarification. With that, we are going to wrap up with one more question. So, Katie, do you have anything from the audience for us today?
I think this is a good way to end the night. We've talked a lot about getting relevant experience, making sure our resumes are pertinent, applicable, really getting those rich and diverse experiences. We've had a couple questions from some of our participants who are undergrads about how can they best reach out to people to start building this resume, even if they're maybe early on in their schooling career, to let those people know that, they're serious about this, and any advice you'd have for kind of establishing those connections, even early on.
Can I take just a quick second? I saw a question and I don't know where it is now. It was somewhere in the chat, maybe before, and I think they were trying to move it to the Q&A. There was a student asking how would they indicate that they're male, since that's one of the categories that ASHA is also looking to grow. I would not put that on a resume. I don't think that fits well there. And also don't do that, right? Don't put like education languages, male, don't do that. But definitely put that in your personal statement. I think that would be awesome there. This is something maybe we'll do in the future. We'll do a session on personal statements, but I always say if you are in those categories, again, the 3 categories that ASHA is looking to grow: male, bilingual or multilingual professionals, and underrepresented minority. I don't care what the personal question statement is. weave that in there. So I always say put it in the like first or second line as a subordinate clause. So, the question could be about like, you know, why is pizza awesome? And I would say, as a bilingual English Spanish speaking Black woman, I think pizza is incredible because, right? So put it in there in some way. So if you are in one of those categories, put that in there in line 1 or 2, because again, as they read, they can't unknow that information. So while different programs, legislation might limit what they can ask or what they can, that you can't unknow the information once you do know it. So I would suggest to put that there in a personal statement. And sorry, we can go back to the question. I just didn't want to miss that because I saw that question earlier.
So I wanted to just add to or answer that question about if you're an undergrad and how to get started. I think it's really important to begin networking now. In your community, even if there's an opportunity for you to go to like a skilled nursing facility and volunteer during the holidays, things of that nature are ways that you can start to meet those who are in the profession and ask, would I be able to observe? For me, I happen to have an aunt who worked in a rehab facility. She worked and she's in Charlotte. It was a big hospital system and they had like an inpatient rehab system, and she worked there as the secretary, and she just said, hey, you should really think about this field. This is how I became started getting into the field and ultimately became a speech language pathologist. But that's where I began doing my observations and learning more about the field. And I think those observations or guided observations are so important because they really let you know if this is something you want to do or not. So there are ways that you can reach out to the departments to see if they will allow students to observe. And I know during COVID times, things were a little different. I'm not sure what has shifted as a result of that, but it never hurts to ask. And even as an undergraduate, especially if your university has an undergraduate program that focuses specifically on communication sciences and disorders, then you can leverage that as well because often they're connected to a graduate program or other hospital schools or things of that nature. So if you have those opportunities, then take advantage of them. Also, if you are, I know I had a friend, I was in the minority student leadership program, and they also allow undergraduates to participate in those programs. So that's another way that you can get involved. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is it's never too early, especially once you're you're thinking this is the path I want to take. It's never too early to start making connections. And through those connections, then you'll be able to do so many things, observe, get letters of recommendation, get jobs later, things of that nature.
Great. Thank you so much. So to wrap up, it is never too early and it is never a bad thing to ask. So those are 2 priorities. And I want to thank all of you guys for sharing tonight. It's been a wonderful discussion and we're wrapping up our night. So in a moment, we're going to share how you can contact all of our incredible panelists from tonight. As you sign out, you're going to get a post-event survey. Take a moment to fill it out. Let us know how we can make this event better, what you liked and disliked about it. We want to make sure that we're serving your needs best as we can. So we're also going to put that survey link in the chat right now. With that, our next virtual office hours event is going to be January 29th, 2025, guys. And we're going to focus on CFs and externships. So start thinking about your questions. We're going to send out more information on it soon. And you can also check out the rest of our spring 2025 events using the link put in the chat here. We also really want to encourage you guys to visit the convention in Seattle. They said it tonight, going to conventions is a great way to get to learn about more things. This is a great opportunity. So NSSLHA is going to be having a bunch of events from December 5th to the 7th. Be sure to visit our lounge. There will be cookies there. Next, we have the National NSSLHA undergrad scholarship applications that is going to close on December 31st. We would love for you to share with your chapter members and other people that you think could benefit. It's really an awesome opportunity, so please encourage anyone that you know is an undergraduate student to apply.
We want to remind you of the benefits gained by joining National NSSLHA. Members are eligible for cash giveaway, scholarships, awards, and you can apply for national level student leadership opportunities like Kenny and myself hold right now. You can also get journal access, discounted convention. So basically, join National NSSLHA. Grad students can receive the conversion discount additionally when you are members of National NSSLHA for the last 2 years of graduate school. More information can be found at the link in the chat. So we have an exciting new opportunity that was created this year. It's a membership scholarship in partnership with ASHA's convention and meetings team. We're able to add a donation option and collect funds where we can now offer free memberships for students. So the student application is open for this. So please consider applying, and it's a great tool.
And on the behalf of National NSSLHA, we would like to thank our professional panelists for offering their time and expertise. It's been such a great discussion. We've even went over a few minutes, so we apologize for that. But here you can see that they've provided the best way to get in contact with them. Feel free to screenshot this information, but we do ask that you only contact them via the means that they have listed here, as we know that they all have very busy careers and lives to manage. It's been a wonderful discussion tonight, and it's only with the help of our dedicated members like the people that joined us that we're able to have these beautiful conversations, and our community continues to thrive. This conversation has been recorded, and it will be posted on National NSSLHA's social media accounts. And with that being said, have a wonderful evening, everybody.